The New York Jets head south to Miami this week to play their division rival Miami Dolphins. BETDAQ currently has the Jets installed as a 3-point favorite in this game. Total hasn't yet been released on BETDAQ, but it is 40 right now out in Las Vegas. Do expect that total to stay somewhere in that neighborhood in BETDAQ, sort of low, one of the lower totals this week. And it's because these are two offenses that a lot of people don't think are going to be very good. Now, we've seen 2 weeks of the season already, and the reviews are mixed. Both of these teams have had one game where that offense looked very good, and one game where it looked like everybody was expecting them to look. For the Jets, in week 1, they hung 48 points on Buffalo. Now, had a couple, I believe they had a special teams touchdown, a defensive touchdown, so it wasn't all offensive production, but still, that offense looked very good, moved the ball very well. Mark Sanchez played a great game. 48 points speaks for itself, even if you do have a defensive touchdown or a special teams touchdown mixed in there. However, last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, that Jets offense was severely limited. They looked like the offense everybody expected them to be heading into the year. Steelers played them differently than the Bills did. I mean, they really crowded their receivers. Looked like they were crowding the line of scrimmage. Jets receivers really struggled to get off the line of scrimmage. Rookie receiver Stephen Hill held without a reception after having a nice game in week 1. And that's the Jets' problem. They don't, outside of Santonio Holmes, they don't have playmakers at the wide receiver position. They don't have a difference maker at running back. So Mark Sanchez, while he might be a capable enough quarterback where, if you put enough weapons around him, he could lead a team, without those weapons, what is this offense going to look like? Well, I think against a quality defense like Pittsburgh, it's going to look like what you saw last week. Mark Sanchez is going to throw for about 130 yards, and this offense is going to be extremely pedestrian. And that's why I'll say it. I think the Jets need to go with more of Tim Tebow. Tebow got in for only a couple of plays last week. I think he only ran once, got right in the game, ran for 22 or 25 yards, something like that up the middle. The thing about it is Tebow is their best playmaker on offense. This is a team that has no playmakers at the wide receiver position after they shipped off Brandon Marshall. Now, Reggie Bush, I'm sure, would argue with that, and Bush is coming on. This last year and a half for him has proven to be sort of the prime of his career. He's now developed into an every down back after spending most of the beginning of his career as sort of a third down back. But Tebow got in the game last week, provided them with a spark, and Tebow showed last year in Denver that without a lot around him, and they had a couple of young wide receivers and Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker, he was able, because of his running ability, they were at least able to do something. And, of course, don't need to mention that he threw for over 300 yards on that same Pittsburgh Steelers defense that so limited the Jets last week. So I do expect Tony Sperano and Rex Ryan, they didn't get this guy for nothing. I expect them to use him more this week and more as the season progresses. And quite frankly, they need to. And it's not because, if they had all the weapons at wide receiver to make Mark Sanchez all that he could be, maybe they wouldn't need to. But the choice without Tim Tebow, without the option that he gives you with his running ability and the threat to throw the ball, without that, what you're left with, if you strip him from this team and Sanchez and these wide receivers and Sean Green, that is an extremely ordinary offense. And maybe it'd still be ordinary if Tebow got more time, but at least that would give it a playmaking wrinkle. And we saw as soon as he came in last week against the Steelers, probably their best offensive play of the game. The first play of the game was one of his runs right up the middle. So we'll see if they get him more involved this week. Again, the Jets are a 3-point road favorite here in this game against the Dolphins. Miami, everybody expected Miami to be awful heading into the year. They looked awful in week 1, a blowout loss to Houston. But last week, what do you make of last week? Now, heading into last week, I said on the video for the game, I said the line to me felt very suspicious. Oakland was only a 1-point favorite in that game. I know Oakland had lost in week 1 to San Diego. They look like the same old Raiders, sort of shooting themselves in the foot with untimely penalties and mistakes. But Oakland clearly has some talent. I mean, they've got a quarterback in Carson Palmer who can still play. I believe, one of the best running backs in the league in Darren McFadden, a couple of good young wide receivers. Oakland has talent there. That's more than you can say about the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins are starting a rookie quarterback who has very little experience at quarterback, even at the collegiate level. I mean, he started his career at Texas A&M as a wide receiver. No playmakers at the wide receiver position. Reggie Bush, who's been a third down back throughout most of his career, is now their main guy on offense. And the Dolphins defense, nothing special, looked awful in week 1 against the Texans and were middle of the pack in the NFL last year. So when you looked at last week's game, and I know the Raiders traditionally struggle in early games on the East Coast, as some West Coast teams often do, but still seemed to me like Oakland should be at least a 4.5 point favorite in that game. The line felt fishy to me, so I stayed away from the game, felt uncomfortable. And sure enough, the Dolphins came out of nowhere, blew out the Raiders. Where did that performance come from? Where did that performance on offense come from? So this week, again, it feels Jets should be better than the Dolphins. I mean, when you break it down, the Dolphins offensively, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they did it last week. I don't know how they're going to do it against the Jets. Obviously, Tannehill played much better last week. The Jets do have a good defense. Expect them to bother Tannehill, harass Tannehill. They have a much better defense than the Oakland Raiders, a different league. So I actually do lean towards the under here. The total is 40 out in Vegas. Not sure what it is yet on BETDAQ. They haven't released it. A lot of these totals, I think that, we are in a new era in the NFL, seeing higher scoring games. But I feel like some of these totals this week are creeping up a little high. And not that 40 points is a high total at all, but I think the Dolphins are really going to be limited on offense this week by that Jets defense. And what will we see out of the Jets offense? That remains to be seen. Not sure I feel comfortable with the Jets, a 3-point favorite. Not sure I'm going to pull the trigger and bet on them in this game, but I do lean towards them. I do think they will most likely go down to Miami and get a road win. That has more to do with the lack of faith that I have in the Miami Dolphins, even after last week. I still haven't bought into this team, haven't come around, don't see enough there. So it has more to do with the lack of faith that I have in the Dolphins than the faith I might have in the New York Jets. But should be a good competitive game, as most games with close 3-point lines, division rivalries like this are. I do expect a relatively low-scoring game. And once again, I do lean towards the New York Jets -3 going down there to Miami and taking care of business.